All discussions and interactions are meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. They're not intended to breach the ATA Code of Conduct, single out any student or educator, or diminish professional integrity in any way.
Professional development with Mr. Drover. Gun half dropping in your pocket when we come over. Keep it live. Good development with Mr. Drover.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm thrilled to have Damian Cooper on. Damian is an independent consultant with extensive experience helping educators worldwide refine their teaching and assessment practices. With a diverse background as a teacher, department head, librarian, consultant, and curriculum developer, Damian has dedicated over 2 decades to specializing in student assessment. He's also a highly regarded author, known for his influential books Talk About Assessment, Strategies and Tools to Improve Learning, and Talk About Assessment, High School Strategies and Tools. In this episode, Damian and I dive deep into the concepts presented in his more recent work, Rebooting Assessment. We discuss why a professional development day centered around his book unexpectedly resonated with me, a self-proclaimed skeptic of PD. We explore the core principles of his approach, focusing on practical strategies for effective assessment that validates what many educators already do in their classroom. Join me as we unpack how Rebooting Assessment offers more formalized and reassuring framework for improving student learning. Let's dive in. Damian Cooper, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Conrad.
I guess communicate to the audience why you're on this particular show is that my employer had a professional development day centered around your book, Rebooting Assessment. And I guess typically, and it happens a lot, is that PD days become like a little bit eye-rolly and a little bit, teachers feel like they are being preached at. And I guess full disclosure, any other PD day I walk in, I'm like, oh, sometimes. And but we were tasked to pre-read this beforehand. And we were actually given a bit of time in the morning of that professional development day to read it. And so I'm sitting there, opening it up, reading it. Oh, that kind of makes sense. Like that's what I'm already doing in some aspects. And it was almost reassuring that someone had this a little more academic than just what I had in my head. Because again, I think as educators, we know how to teach, but for it to be formalized and sort of guided by, a very comprehensive book, I thought that was amazing. And it was one of the best professional development days I've had in forever. And so that's why I needed to get you on and have a conversation with it. So before we get into that book and you can explain to people what I'm all hyped up about, maybe just give a little introduction about yourself, how you got to the point where you are now.
Well, first of all, Conrad, thank you very much for the very positive feedback. I do appreciate it. I understand fully what you're saying. I've been there myself in professional development sessions. Some background. I am in my 46th year working in education, so I've seen a lot and done a lot.
I bet.
I began my career as a high school English, drama, and special education teacher, and was very happy doing that, and then moved into a headship role and was happy doing that. But I've always been inquisitive and have had some wonderful opportunities. Actually, quite early on in my teaching career, had the opportunity to apply with a colleague for a Ministry of Education grant here in Ontario, where I live. And Faye Ward and I got this job, a 2-year position doing research and then publishing documents for the Ministry of Education to support young people in vocational schools. And we had this incredible opportunity, an office, a secretary, a budget, and we simply had to report twice a month to our advisory committee. And that was a turning point for me because it really sparked my fascination with assessment, student assessment, that's continued to this day. And so from that point, I had an interesting career. I would go back into the classroom for a year, sometimes longer, sometimes less. And then I had the opportunity to work uh, in a ministry school, which was a research school, an experimental school, testing out some of my theories. And then I went back into another school, and then I moved into the publishing business for 5 years with Nelson Education, which really taught me about the private sector. I had only thought as a teacher before. And of course, when you work in the private sector, albeit for an educational publisher, it's about the bottom line. They want to sell books and they want the
Yeah.
market share. So I went there to Nelson Education as their assessment consultant, initially for 1 semester, and I stayed there 5 years. And then went back into the classroom after that, which was wonderful and exciting, and then launched my own consulting business in 2006. And since that time, I have been traveling, speaking, writing books. This, in fact, was my 4th book. My wife and I have been blessed insofar as we've had the opportunity to travel the world. Me working, and then we would tack on some holiday time as well. So it's been an amazing journey, and I'm going to tell you that at 70 years of age, I'm sliding into semi-retirement at this point, quite happily,
Well
but still
deserved.
remaining as passionate as ever about student assessment.
I like how, like, when you initially left the classroom, like, you still jump back into it every now and then. And I think that's important, especially for educational experts, the ones that we call upon to help us in the class. I guess one of the typical complaints that teachers have is like, when was the last time they were in a classroom? So I like how you jumped back into the classroom periodically. And I don't know if that was intentional or it just that's what happenstance happened, but I think it does make a little more validity to what you're trying to, write about and work on. Initially, when you initially went into the research role, was it hard to leave the classroom?
I'm going to be honest with you and say no, just because I was so excited by the opportunity to explore much more deeply the area of student assessment, which had really begun to resonate with me. And I just wanted to learn more. And when Faye and I got that initial ministry contract with the Ministry of Education in Ontario, we were kind of babes in the wood, quite frankly. We were flattered, but we were afraid, nervous, because we thought, well, we don't know enough. So we traveled the province. We traveled the length and breadth of Ontario, speaking to students, to teachers, and to parents. And what I learned through that project, and we delivered on budget and on time, what I learned from that was what you alluded to, that if I'm going to have credibility with educators, if I'm going to move into more of a consulting role, a support role, then I have a moral, ethical, professional responsibility to remain as current as I can. So throughout my consulting career, I have also made it my business to be visiting schools, talking with students, teachers, parents all the time. And that, if you read any one of my books, they are full of case studies. They are full of video. There was only one of my 4 books that did not include video, and that wasn't my choice. But those videos are in classrooms. We shot the videos. They're videos of classrooms that my colleagues and I have visited. Case studies are from my own classrooms over the years, as well as the teachers that I've been able to work with. And that has always spoken to teachers in the way that you have found so satisfactory. It's not ivory towerish. It is action research. It's grounded in the day-to-day reality of classrooms across Canada and indeed around the world for me in terms of my consulting work as well.
This episode is sponsored by Alpha Progression, the no BS training app built specifically for muscle growth. This isn't just another generic fitness tracker. Alpha Progression is 100% focused on maximizing muscle gain using science-backed principles developed by serious lifters, personal trainers, and competitive bodybuilders. I've been a competitive athlete most of my life, but after university, it became harder to stick to a consistent and effective program. Now, as a busy teacher and a fiance, I don't have time to waste guessing my workouts or to build my own program. That's where Alpha Progression changed the game for me. One of the features I use the most is my gym. I just enter the equipment available at my school's gym. I choose which body part I want to focus on, or the ones that I want to avoid due to injury, and I set my goal, whether that's to maximize size, maximize strength, or a balanced mix of both. The app then builds a personalized plan from scratch. Seriously, there are over 1 trillion possible combinations. It's like having a $500 a month personal trainer in your pocket. In fact, one coach told the developers that this app follows exactly the same principles he uses with his clients. Alpha Progression is also one of the most intuitive apps I've ever used. The interface is clean, fast, and easy. Even though it's packed with features, I've completely ditched my old duotang. Now I log my sets, reps, and rest times right in the app. And it even gives me progression recommendations. Tell me what weight and what reps I should aim for based on my past workouts. It takes the guesswork out of strength training and guarantees long-term results. And it's not just me saying this. Alpha Progression has twice been named App of the Day by Apple and is the top-rated fitness app in Germany. It's now expanding globally, and trust me, it deserves the hype. You can download Alpha Progression for free today and try it out at alphaprogression.com/drover. That link gives you a 14-day free trial for the pro version. And if you love it, like I do, you'll get 20% off the pro version, which is just $12.99 a month or $79.99 a year. Train smarter, grow faster, check out Alpha Progression. Now back to the show. Hey, for one, the videos, it's really cool that you got a QR code for to get there. That is a really, and we can get on this later. Sorry, but the QR codes save so much time in terms of trying to digest information, and one of your big takeaways is how to use technology productively, and it's sort of meta that your own book also utilizes technology because whatever can help students, this is what I found out, whatever accommodations can help students can also help teachers. And I find sometimes we need to practice what we preach or take our own advice. So I really like the QR codes, especially in some of the case studies. And I guess now we can sort of roll into, we've built up enough suspense because we're talking about what you have researched and your, I guess, no ivory tower thing, but your boots on the ground looking at schools across Ontario, which is a very diverse province. You have everything from Federal Reserve schools to public schools to private schools. So you've probably had a range of different classroom scenarios. Some probably, I guess, more easily adaptable to change or inquiry-based learning, and some that would take a lot of work to implement this triangulated assessment that we're going to get into. So before I get into the triangulated assessment, because that is the piece that I just had parent-teacher interviews, and I think I said triangulated assessment 25 times when I was talking to them. My student teachers were observing me, and they're like, do you just need a script? Because you've been saying the same thing over and over again. The way our parent-teacher interviews happen, it's 10 minutes with each parent. And it's
Right.
I call it speed dating. Come in here, we'll hit the timer. I'll tell you everything I can vomit out of my mouth in 10 minutes, and then that'll be great. But what I also could you explain a little bit about the vocal, I guess,
Yes.
structure? Because I know in ways as a teacher, I think we've heard this differently, but a lot of the same content, but it hasn't been organized in such an accessible way. So could you touch upon what that is and sort of how that sort of turns into like the other part of the book?
Absolutely. VOCAL, I do like acronyms, and VOCAL stands for Validating Observations and Conversations When Assessing Learning. And prior to the book, my colleagues and I actually developed an online course that was called VOCAL. So this research that we did began as an interactive course for teachers, and that is still available. So while we didn't call the book VOCAL, we called the book Rebooting Assessment, but we used the structure that exists in the online course throughout the book, including all of the icons, which in a very convenient shorthand way communicate to teachers. We suggest that you might want to record this in terms of audio, or you might want to have a video running here, or whatever it might be. But the origin of the acronym is, of course, that forever and a day, written assessment, product assessment, has been regarded as a word I detest, rigorous, in the eyes of parents, teachers, and the media and politicians and everybody else. And of course, the extreme of that is we will have timed tests and exams where we'll sit students in rooms where they're not allowed to talk to anybody, they're not allowed to access any resources, they have to work against the clock, an entirely artificial way, but done in that way to supposedly maximize reliability of the data you're going to gather. But of course, when you put all those constraints around an assessment strategy, raises anxiety, and you may end up not actually gathering valid data at all about your assessment targets because kids are stressed. And of course, for students who are at risk, students who have learning disabilities, students who are challenged in various ways, that particular strategy as a means of assessment can put them at a huge disadvantage. And we have seen that, of course, in test results, large-scale test results across Canada and indeed around the world. So the VOCAL approach is basically saying, through our research, we wanted to convince students, well, they get it, but their parents and teachers, that assessing by conversation, the kind of conversation we're having right now, or assessing by having students perform a task rather than write about it, and while they're performing that task, capture it using a handheld device, whether that be a tablet or a cell phone, and then looking at that as the evidence is not only desirable, but it's essential as curriculum moves away from all about content to be memorized, and instead curriculum is becoming characterized more and more, especially in provinces like BC, who has, from my point of view, the best curriculum I've seen in my career. That curriculum is largely now about competencies, what the skills that students can demonstrate in real life contexts. And so it doesn't make any sense to try and capture the evidence of those through traditional means such as written products, and in particular, means such as tests and examinations. So hence the need to triangulate assessment data. And for skeptics, I'll be speaking to parents next week. I'm very fortunate. My wife and I are going to Bermuda, and one of the things I've been asked to do is please speak to our parents, who
That's
can be
cool.
rather traditional. And I will use for them, not an example from the classroom, but I'll talk about driver's test. How would you feel sharing the road with new drivers who've been certified purely on the basis of the score they got on the multiple choice test based on the driver's handbook? Don't you also want them to prove that they can drive that car safely and responsibly and with concern for others? And so in order to gather evidence of those skills, as an instructor sitting beside the driver and observing them while they demonstrate the skills. I mean, this is not rocket science, Conrad, but what my colleagues and I have done is validate conversational assessment, performance assessment for those who are perhaps skeptical, and to say it's absolutely legitimate and it's vital.
Yeah, I'll have to admit, like, when I was doing my parent-teacher interviews, like I was on guard and ready to defend the observational conversational one because I wasn't sure how parents were going to react to it. And it it is not it's not rocket science. And I think your I guess opinion on how written assessment and the rigorous testing that we do to students doesn't really match up to the competencies that we're actually trying to get them to do in real world. There's only a few things that I can think of that should be evaluated on like a time sensitive measure. So like CPR training, paramedic
Yes,
training, like
of
stuff
course.
like that where there is a temporal pressure that needs to
Yes.
get done, right?
Right.
But I really think that, and you probably agree with me, like the time limits on tests are purely like a practical thing for the institution. Like it just needs to get done in a certain hour because we need to go home or whatever, right? But in reality, like I give accommodations to my students all the time, like take as much time as you need. So I really think that is kind of silly. But in terms of
It
like,
is.
yeah, like I don't know, like there is certain things that written assessment would just need, like if you're assessing English or like something like that, or communications in a certain context, yes, your spelling, your grammar, the way you write should be evaluated. In my scenario, where I'm teaching audio, video production, and this is where I really love this, is because half my assessment is observational in this particular course. So I had students recreating the Three Little Pigs. That was their film studies project, and they're using the green screen. And basically, I slowly start as the director, directing them what to do, and then sort of ease my way out of it and sort of sneak out of the room, pretty much. And then, like they self-regulate, like they yell at each other and argue it to like do their work. And like I love arguments when students argue. I just do,
Mhm, mhm.
because especially when they're arguing about the content, I mean, like, wow, they have an opinion. They care about this.
Yes.
Um,
They're engaged.
and exactly. And I don't want to break that apart to make them write, okay, you have a multiple choice assessment on how to edit this film, or the shots that the mid shot, the establishing shot, the tilt shot that you had to do. I don't want them to have to break that apart to do a test, but I'm literally watching them as I'm sort of working with them of like, well, what would, and I always inquire, like, when they ask me a question, they get so annoyed because I just asked them another question back.
Right.
I'm like, well, what are you trying to do? I'm like, what what is your end goal here? What do you want to do? Do you want to build suspense? Do you want to make the character bigger or scarier than he actually is? Do you want to make him smaller than he actually is? And then with those questions, they find the answer already.
Of
And
course.
I'm just observing that all the time. And it's easy in film studies and audio video, like video production, because like they're making the thing that I'm assessing, the video, right? Which is really great.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and then when I'm watching them edit, like today, they're editing, and the person that normally does the editing was absent today. So the student that I had, she was really struggling because like, I don't know how to edit. I'm like, that's literally why you're here. So I just observed, and I got this from a colleague in Fort McMurray. It's called just-in-time learning.
Yeah.
So how do I do this when it comes up? And then you
Right.
tell them as they go. And I couldn't do that type of learning, that type of teaching, if I was bogged down by what type of assessments I have to do.
Right.
And that it's really easy to say, I guess, in a vocational, like I guess I would call audio video production vocational at this point.
Mhm.
Um, but now reading this book and sort of having the experience of doing it in sort of a communications technology, um, option elective setting. I've now done it with my grade sevens in their science class. And man, it makes my life easier. It 100% makes my life easier because I'm just observing them, and I'm focusing on, I feel like myself, I'm focusing more on teaching them than assessing
Mhm.
them.
Mm,
but I'm actually
sure.
assessing them. So
Yes, you are. Yes, of course.
yeah.
I do want to add, though, that I'm not advocating throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and you
Oh,
alluded to this. I'm not saying there is no place for written evidence. Of course there is.
mhm.
But as we know, good assessment design begins with the curriculum and the curriculum outcomes, and you design, choose, select your assessment tools according to what the outcomes say is the intended goal. And so if that goal has to do with writing correct prose, then having the students write correct prose is the appropriate assessment technique.
Yeah.
But the problem is when we have invalid assessments, i.e., where the outcome says students will be able to do such and such, and it lists a skill of
Yeah.
performance, and then they're assessed by having them write about it. And that's what I'm pushing back against. And then there are the people who will say next week, when I'm speaking to these parents, well, yes, but universities haven't moved. They still demand examinations. Well, it depends. That's a wonderful myth to perpetrate as a reason for not changing what goes on in K to 12 schools. But in fact, many, many universities have wonderful approaches to assessment. I live close to Hamilton, where the McMaster Medical School has been doing using performance assessments with its students for decades now, just because it makes sense for the reasons that I've been talking about. So it's not true. That having been said, when students are headed to higher education, where exams and essays do remain the primary means of gathering evidence of their learning, then teachers in university track courses do have a responsibility for preparing students to be successful on tests and exams. But it doesn't mean that that's all that you do. It's back to the
The
triangulation.
triangle. Yeah.
So you must prepare students, assess them according to the curriculum and according to the destinations and the kinds of things they're going to have to do when they get there. I used to teach the old grade 13 English in Ontario. So again, I'm showing my age. And I could assume as a grade 13 teacher that those students were all headed to university. And in first year, almost regardless of subject discipline, they were going to find themselves in lecture theatres where they had to learn through lecture. And so once every 2 weeks, I would lecture my students for 60 minutes of a 70-minute period. And then I would collect the notes that they had taken to mark them for appropriateness. And they hated it, and I hated doing it.
Yeah.
But I had
That
a
sounds awful.
responsibility to teach them how to learn by lecture. But my point is, I did it once in a 10-day cycle. I didn't do it all the time.
Yeah.
The same applies to having students able and get practice in writing timed tests and exams. They remain,
Mhm.
from my point of view, inappropriate, inauthentic means of assessment. But if students have to do them after they leave our care, then we have to prepare them for success on those.
Yeah. I think as educators, we want to have them a holistic approach to education, and that does include writing. So that's the pillar. That's the one third of the triangle, and then
Yes.
it's like producing something. And like I remember when I was in university, the big hot topic word was like social constructivism, right? So like constructing something um, allows you to take the information you just heard, translate it in your brain to something that you understand, and then produce a viable product from it. And then social constructivism like reinforces that learning because you're doing it with a peer. And like
Mm-hmm.
that relationship aspect really like fortifies what you just learned. So that's the other pillar. Like so we have the two bases there. And then afterwards it's that conversation observational approach. And I think it doesn't really work if you don't have all three of them because I'm thinking like
That's
my
right.
math class, I'm thinking, and then I'm also again people always like teaching to the test is sometimes like a necessary thing if you're looking at the goals of your students, right? Like I want to get into this university, I need to get this mark, and sometimes it is like a means to the end, right? But there's also, I always think it's like a meta lesson here because I'm also teaching them strategy, all right? Like, okay, like if you're trying to do this, this, and this, what is a way, like what is the most viable option for you to get to your goal? And sometimes it is like cracking down and writing up, like learning how to, do written assessment. But I think the triangulated approach, and that is the thing that I latched onto the most, because it does give you a backup for maybe the skeptics of the written stuff. Like, oh no, we're not throwing everything out. We have this and we have the base of this. But I think it's almost a validity check. So if you do have like some sort of written test, right? The validity check is a conversation, the one-on-one conversation. And from a practical standpoint, I love it as a teacher because it's one less thing that I have to mark.
Yes.
I guess my initial thought, how I am implementing this, is that I've been utilizing my student teachers, and as they're teaching the lesson, and it's a really good like scaffold for me because eventually I'll have to do this without a student teacher.
Mhm.
But my student teachers are teaching, and I take one kid aside, and I'm like, hey, like let's just go over the last lesson. What did we learn here? And then that is also a time of learning for the student, because if he stumbles on vocabulary or doesn't know what I'm saying, or I catch those gaps, I can teach it to him right there on a one-on-one basis. I don't have
Indeed.
to, okay, well, next class I have to re-go over all this again, but I can strategically target the kids and exactly what they're missing. So not only is it an assessment, but it is also assessment as learning.
Yes,
And
indeed.
what I have done, and I think this is how you would suggest implementing technology, I just had my voice memos on my phone, and then I actually like threw it into AI, and I said, okay, write me out some bullet points and stuff like this. And then I looked at it, and then it's not just that conversation. Like, I know this kid, right? I've known him since September. I understand his quirks. I understand when he misspeaks,
Mhm.
and everything like that. And man, it's almost a double-edged sword in terms of a teacher's ego, because what I've noticed since doing this is kids don't know as much as I thought they did on the things that I taught them.
Ha, ha. Which
Yeah.
again points to you need multiple sources of
Mm.
evidence, and
Yeah.
you cannot, to use Grant Wiggins term, who was a huge influence on my work, in order to convict students to learning, like any good detective gathering evidence, you would not convict on the basis of one person's testimony, one piece of evidence. You need corroboration of multiple
Mhm.
pieces of
I
evidence.
like that analogy.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's a very, very, very powerful notion. You did mention, that you're discovering, it sounds like, that the power of one-on-one conversations with students, which of course is a wonderful kind of conversation where you, the teacher, have one-on-one time with the student. And of course, in the book, we talk about the kind of proactive steps that the teacher needs to take with respect to classroom management to
Yeah, I was
enable
going to
you
talk
to
about
have
that.
uninterrupted one-on-one conversations. And that's huge, and we deal with that exhaustively in the text. But there are other kinds of conversations, the kinds of conversations that are going on amongst a group of students as they're engaged perhaps in a scientific inquiry. Um, y- you know,
Excuse me.
those conversations which are exploratory perhaps involve disagreements and
Yeah,
then
observing the
coming to greater
arguments. Yeah.
understanding. Absolutely. That can be incredibly rich evidence of the thought processes that are going on as students are learning. Um, Now, of course, I have had teachers say, when they hear about or read about these approaches in rebooting assessment, well, yes, but doesn't that mean that your marking load increases because you have to pour through all these hours and hours of recordings, be they audio recordings, be they video recordings? But we also talk a lot about the importance of students curating their own evidence. So, in other words, if you've got a tablet sitting there capturing the conversation going on while students are engaged in that scientific inquiry I mentioned, and then when it's over, then the students actually watch their own recording and they identify moments, aha moments, when I, Conrad, said such and such, and then when
The light
Damian said
bulb,
such
yeah.
and such, those were, and so in other words, you're putting the onus on the students to cite those moments of learning that are significant. And that in and of itself, we know from Bloom and from many other educators over the years, that students metacognitively reflecting on their own learning and saying this was where the light bulb went on is a
Yeah.
very, very powerful strategy.
I didn't even
So
think about that before. Yeah.
a huge amount of the book is about sharing the assessment responsibility with the students, because teachers don't have sufficient time, energy, or anything else to be the sole assessor in the classroom. And if ultimately my goal as an assessor is to put myself out of the job, to render myself redundant, the student no longer needs to hear from Damian Cooper whether their work is good, bad, or indifferent. And if we want them to develop that level of autonomous understanding, then we have to engage them in the assessment process, both self-assessment and peer assessment.
Yeah, I guess it's hitting it in two different ways, right? It's the practical way that we don't have enough time to do everything. And I think that's where the animosity comes from these professional development days, because a lot of times they are framed with, hey, everyone, I know you're super busy and we don't have enough resources, but here's a bunch of list of nuanced things that I want you to try to implement in your classroom. And teachers, looking at any new idea like that, I think some of them, they don't bother to like look through the book to find out what you were just talking about, but they're a little exhausted because they're like, oh my God, this is just another thing on my plate. But again, the thing that hooked me right now is like, this actually makes my life easier. And going about what you said about this, the students being like co-authors of their own assessments almost. Um, I try to do that in my classroom almost daily. And the more I put on to the kids, the less I put on to myself,
Yes.
whether it be group discussions or teach us to a peer. Like, just do it. Like, go through what are the things that you already know. Because I don't want to teach you things you already know. So, like, let's see what you can teach. And there is something to say about giving people responsibility, and with giving
Yes,
students responsibility, because
absolutely.
I guess when you give the responsibility to the students, at least from what I've seen, is they have a sense of ownership in their own learning. And what you talked about the aha moment, right? Um, I think it is important for students to see that success, that and identify exactly when that success happened, because then they can look back, and when they are in those university classes that are lecture based and difficult, and they don't have like the supports that they had in primary school or at secondary school, um, they know how to solve and self-regulate their own learning because they know how they learn.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Speaking about time, there's a text feature throughout Rebooting Assessment, a little block that says it's about time, where we deal with those time issues and we deal with how what we're advocating can, in the long run, save time for teachers. So that's an important feature. But it came to my realization fairly early on in my teaching career when I was teaching English, that the what I had learned from my own teachers when I was a student, and then nothing changed this thinking for me during my university years. The absurd way in which so many teachers, particularly at the intermediate, middle grades and high school grades, the way teachers approach marking of student work. And the reason it takes so long for many teachers is they not only identify errors on students' written work, and I'm talking written work here, but they also correct the errors. Well, of all the stupid things to do. So, in other words, it massively increases the amount of time the teacher spends marking, and it
Yeah.
places absolutely no responsibility on the student whatsoever themselves to do any thinking about what they did wrong. And yet that, for so many teachers, and even to this day, persists as one of the ways that teachers mark student work. Now, obviously, you have to teach them enough understanding so that you can circle an error and then use a code or whatever, a shorthand that indicates the nature of the error. But ultimately, you want to stop even putting that shorthand, because you want the student to stop and realize there's something wrong here, but it's incumbent upon them to figure out what it is and to fix it. Because otherwise, marking is just a routine that teachers go through with little or no impact on improving student learning.
I think it's not about getting the answer. I think it's the hunt for the answer. And I've done this a lot of times when I was teaching math last year with my grade 8s, is that I would give them, just like as you said, I'd give them the test back with the X, and they'd be kind of annoyed by me that I didn't give them the right answer. I'm like, the right answer is in our notes, and especially in science class. And I put I run everything on my Google Classroom, really tight ship. Everything's cataloged and organized. And I said, you hunt for this, because
Yes.
your pursuit for it is going to increase your memorization or your understanding of it, rather than just me giving you the answer. And
Of
I
course.
told them eventually by the end of the year, because when you're teaching science, it's really easy to just Google it. I told them, and I gave them a very good ethos, an appeal to reason. I told them you will not learn this the same way if you just Google it. Will it give you the
No.
right answer? Probably. I'll probably give you a very convoluted answer. Like if I'm talking about energy systems and the word glycolysis comes into play, that is not what we're talking about. And I definitely know you Googled it, because I did not know that word until first year university. So there is, I find once you explain to the students and once they have that buy-in, that you will not learn this way, they will actually not take the easy way. They'll actually, okay, I always focus on the process of learning with them. Like, your goal is not to get a good mark in this class. Your goal is to understand what I'm talking about right now. And then when the mark is just a byproduct. So you have to walk into every classroom, not saying I'm going to pay attention to what Mr. Drover is saying, not I'm going to do really well in this test. You're going to walk into Mr. Drover's class and be like, my goal is to understand whatever he's talking about.
But you
And
see, there you've hit
yeah.
the nail on the head, because my work for years and years and years, again, huge debt to Grant Wiggins, is teaching for understanding. And what gets in the way of that so often is mark grabbing, point grabbing on the part of students and their parents. And so we have to confront that. We have to talk about that. And one of the things we have to differentiate between is assessment for and as learning, which is during the learning process, as distinct from assessment of learning, which is the summative end of unit task or conversation or written product or whatever it may be. And as if we want to assess learning during the process with the purpose of improving learning and deepening understanding, then by all means draw students' attention to things they did well and things that they did poorly or misconceptions or whatever. But don't put points and marks anywhere near that stuff, because teachers will know that if they've spent all this time marking student work, circling errors, underlining, highlighting, whatever, and then they put a score on the piece of work, then it's the score that the students are drawn to. That's what attracts their attention. And the opportunity to learn from their errors and explore what I did wrong and fix it is completely negated the moment you give them a numerical score. And this is why and Alfie Cohen, of course, has written and spoken endlessly on this topic, that the greatest wrong, the greatest problem in our educational system is that from a very, very, very early age, children and their parents view it as, how do I get maximum points for minimum effort? How do I maximize my score on this test, on this course, so that ultimately I can get to university or whatever it is? And that is a theme of my work throughout, and it's so, so important. What are we actually teaching in our assessment evaluation methods? Are we teaching kids to be point grubbers, or are we teaching them so they understand and develop competencies?
Do you think that in terms of our institutions right now, that point grubbing and that, I guess, numerical evaluation, do you think that's a byproduct of trying to mimic, the sort of, I guess what we would call it, like capitalist mindset,
I don't
like the
think so. I
economic
think
mindset?
it goes back. It predates that. I think if you read the work of Rick Siggins, and he wrote quite eloquently on sort of um, the cult of measurement. Where numbers, points, marks out of 10, 50, the percentage scale, where that all came from, and he sort of traces it back to, because of course the Greeks didn't do that. The Greeks didn't use numbers other than in mathematics. They didn't. Socrates didn't give his students scores. He engaged in discussion about what they'd understood and where the misconceptions still existed. So, but Stiggins certainly talks about the emergence of IQ testing, which of course initially was seen as a way to determine fitness for military service. And that if intelligence can be quantified, then it was a slippery slope to come to the conclusion by educators, and particularly those making educational policy, that, well, if intelligence could be quantified, surely everything teachers teach could be quantified. And that was a slippery slope, and we've never got off it. We have continued down that road.
It's the
And
desire for precision. Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, of course, it's a myth.
Yeah.
This desire and the myth of precision is just that. It's a myth. I mean, I know I bought into it because I was hired and expected to buy into it. And I used to, in my early years of teaching, I used to dread that, a parent or two parents were going to quiz me when they compared the marks their two children had got, and ask me to explain the difference between an 83% and an 81%. And of course, I
That
wouldn't
still
have been
haunts
able
me.
to. Yeah, because in all likelihood, that's just measurement error. That's just my bias. That's
Exactly.
so. This is why today, and it's a hugely misunderstood concept, and yet it is much more than the concept. It is actually what professionals do, and that is use professional judgment. And so a lot of my work in more recent years is helping teachers understand what professional judgment in an educational assessment context means. It doesn't mean that each teacher has a different standard. Far from it. It means that teachers have a set of common standards that they develop and that they collaborate on. And then they engage in moderated marking periodically to ensure that their application of rubrics and other kinds of scales to student work is indeed consistent enough that they can feel confident in the professional judgments that they're making. But what that is about is realizing that teachers looking at the work that students do, be that through product, conversation, or observation, teachers engaging in that assessment practice are human beings looking at what other human beings are
Yeah.
doing.
Some
And
people
there
forget teachers
is
are humans sometimes.
not precision in that, And so we have been in pursuit of this, and this is why standardized testing is the way it is. We'll put all these constraints around this testing situation to minimize the possibility of variability that's due to anything other than student differences in terms of what they've learned. But it's a fool's game. The emperor has no clothes. But we have been on that route, Conrad, for decades. And my colleagues, we created the Canadian Assessment for Learning Network back in 2011 as a pan-Canadian network of teachers who were interested in what I'm talking about here, and bringing assessment into the modern age and out of dark ages, and also countering this myth that anything that can be taught can be measured precisely to 2 decimal points or whatever. It's
Right.
just a load of hooey. And yet, unfortunately, very significant decisions actually get made in terms of who gets into a program, maybe a university program, who doesn't, who
Yeah.
gets a scholarship, who doesn't, on the basis of differences in student scores that are almost certainly attributable to measurement error and nothing else. And
Right.
it's
Yeah,
a
like
travesty. It's a travesty.
yeah, your measurement is only as good as your ruler, like how precise your ruler is. And I don't think, like, again, like, I love what you say about professional judgment. I find is a self check of your own bias for a
Yes.
little bit of it.
Yes.
And I laugh at, like, when you're talking about, like, the difference between arguing with a parent about the difference between a 94 or a 98 or whatever metric we used. Um, because I had a really bright student in my grade A class last year, and I was literally terrified to make a mistake because she'd, like, correct me. Like, brilliant,
Yes.
brilliant, and, like, I'm, like, writing something on the board, and I'm afraid of misspelling it, so I just take a look at her, and she'll give me the nod, right? You know?
I love it.
And, so when I'm marking her, she really helped me with my answer keys. That was really smart about that. But, I told them it's like, because she would come up to me and be like, "Why did I get this? Why did I get this?" And then I'd be like, "Well, what do you think you deserve on this?" And then,
Mhm.
because I could
Mhm.
work with you, man. It's not set in stone. And then I would adjust it accordingly if, like, she could convince me, I guess, if, like, "Oh, yeah, that was worth it." And, sometimes, like, "Oh, I deserve 100% on this." I'm like, "Well, no. Like, this, and this you could work on." But that professional judgment and that 1% error, like, I'm not 1% precise on anything, anything.
Of course not.
Not even, like, my GPS watch is not 1% precise on, like,
No.
distance.
No.
So when it comes down to when I'm looking at if a kid's gonna pass or fail at a 48, right? I'm more inclined to round him up because I understand that I have there's a range where it could go either way because I could have been marking his stuff where I was kind of grumpy or I was a little tired. I didn't understand it. Of course, like, man, the kid could be an absolute, like, comedian and just put me in a good mood every time. So I'm bumping his mark up a little bit, like, just um, subconsciously, like, you just do it. Um, so that's why, like, I know I'm always here to help the student get to where they're at, so I'm always inclined to round them up rather than any round down at all. Um, and yeah, like, professional judgment is a thing, and it's something that
But
I think teachers are scared to utilize because of, political climates or anything like that. Like, they're scared that if they use that professional judgment, it's going to be challenged, I think.
but in every other profession,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
expect professionals to make professional judgments. So why not in teaching? It's
Mhm.
an abdication of responsibility to see that, no, that's not my job. But it is a problem if we are hung up on marks out of 50, 100, or whatever. I mean, we're in an election campaign, right? As we speak, we're in an election campaign. And there are polls published uh, every single day in however you access your news. We happen to read the Globe and Mail online every morning, and I watch CBC News, and so on. Again, showing my age. But with every poll, of course, the measurement error is identified. This poll is accurate within 5 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. Because, of course, a poll is a sample. From the entire population, we interviewed 1,000 people, so we realize that when you extrapolate from the sample to the population, there's going to be measurement error. Well, assessment is the exact same thing. From all that I taught the kids during this unit or during this term or during this course, I take a sample of their work and I use it to represent their learning, and I give it a mark. But what we don't ever do is state the measurement error. And of course, the trouble is it's a house of cards, and if we started stating measurement error on assessments and on report card grades, the house of cards would come tumbling down. Because, again, back to this myth of precision, which has been perpetrated for decades. But in truth, and I write about this in the grading chapter, the last chapter of Rebooting Assessment, along with my colleague Jeff Catania, I talk in there about, frankly, in not stating measurement error, the emperor has no clothes, but it can't be said that there's measurement error to every single assessment. And if there's measurement error in every assessment, imagine the amount of measurement error in a composite grade that goes on a report card at the end of a reporting period.
Right. Yeah, because the error would just compound all the way to your final grade. And like, I find the grades are silly if they don't accurately represent the readiness for the person to go to the next step, right? So a few more things I want to touch upon before we run out of time is I've seen this from a few teachers, and I'm trying to like be empathetic to them because I am a technological pioneer. So I started like being born in 93. I sort of grew up with technology in a sense of like I evolved with it. So I remember the VHS, I remember the cassettes, the DVDs, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, streaming. And I grew up with it and I evolved with it. So I sort of learned with it. Some of my older colleagues still don't have the prowess I have. And again, it either goes through like interest or experience or whatnot, but they are a little more hesitant with implementing technology in their classroom, not necessarily because they couldn't figure it out, but they're also, I guess, concerned about the policy on it too. So one thing that came up was like, well, I don't want to record my students, or like, because there's a taboo when it comes to recording students. And on the student side, we talked about test anxiety, like, oh, like a student gets really anxious when they're writing a test. Well, you could hypothesize that there's similar anxiety when someone's being recorded. That's something that brought up in one of our meetings. And have you taken those into consideration, or is there any, I guess, ways that you could, I guess, work around that, or sort of, I guess, work with?
Absolutely. Helen Hills comes to mind, who is an English teacher featured in Rebooting Assessment.
I remember that.
And Helen had never made video recordings of her students testing anything. But we said we wanted to do it because she was using this really, really cool novel seminar as a summative task for her students in her grade 9 English course. And for our purposes, because we wanted to make videos for the vocal course, we recorded all of these seminars using a smartphone on a tripod. Well, of course, Helen thought this was really, really cool, and she started doing it in her own practice. But we said to her, and Jeff Catania, my colleague, who is an absolute whiz like you with technology, wrote the sections in the chapter that deal with all of the technical issues as well as the legal and ethical issues. And so bottom line is, you don't do any videotaping students without permission from them and their parents. That's number one. So you use a form that has to be signed, etc., etc. You make sure that the administration of your school is in support of what you're doing, because ultimately the buck will stop with them when there are questions, challenges, or whatever coming from outside or from parents. So in other words, you check out ahead of time that you are crossing your T's and dotting your I's. Certainly with respect to data storage, once again, how long does the data get stored for? What are the protocols? Depending on the situation, there may be board-wide protocols around those sorts of things, which technology
Policies,
experts in your board or in your school will inform you about. So all of those things need to be checked out ahead of time. Everyone needs to be on board. And of course, that does then include that any student can opt out of being videotaped. or their parents can say, no, I don't want that to happen. And we had situations like that in terms of when we did videotaping, because of course we had to say to people, these videos are going to travel the world. So we did
Yeah.
indeed have a number of parents who did not want their child's face to appear
Right.
in the videos.
Guess it's like
The
selling
other
the idea
thing,
to them. Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's critical. And then, of course, in terms of that reluctance of teachers who've maybe been at this business for a long time and think this is sort of newfangled stuff, we say start small, engage your students, because very often, they will be in some ways more tech savvy than you are. We talked about they don't really understand the ins and outs of that, but in terms of just
Yeah.
turning on the devices and doing some simple problem
They
solving,
know the basics more than
they
you
know the
do,
basics. Yeah.
but may not
So
know the advanced like I do. Yeah.
right. So all of those things definitely need to be talked about. The other thing that we've built into Rebooting Assessment is the teacher readiness scale, and we advocate that teachers, and we discussed this in our initial meeting. This book is not something to pick up and read by yourself from beginning to end. This is a book to guide the professional inquiry that you and a colleague might engage in. And so we urge teachers to work with at least one other teacher as they're trying new things, implementing things, and then you can give each other feedback and problem solve around what's working and what isn't. And biting off only that which is manageable for you, which the teacher readiness scale, if you do it as a pre and post, or pre, during, and post kind of assessment of your own practice, can be very, very helpful. So those sorts of things are important. And again, to communicate changes like this, I talked about getting student parent permission. It's also informing parents about why you're doing this, what the rationale is behind triangulation, and all of those sorts of things. Bottom line is, be proactive, not reactive. And as Doug Reeves said, if this is a significant new initiative and you're going to put time and energy into it, what am I going to stop doing as I make room for this new initiative? So further to our conversation earlier, I'm going to stop lugging home masses of marking every night as I take a more balanced approach to assessment and hand over a significant portion of the responsibility to the students themselves.
And you get, like, as you're starting that, as your initial steps in doing that observational and video assessment, stuff like that, audio assessment, you can use some of that time that you saved with the method to learn a little bit more about the tech stuff. And then eventually it'll play dividends and you'll have a lot more time for you. So yeah, I really love that. We covered like the policy and, just slowly easing into it, because it doesn't take a lot of tech to do this. It just takes some tech. I have two questions for you to end this. One is from my administrator, because I asked around and I was like, hey, I'm talking to this guy, we have the answers from the mouth of the horse right now. We can do it. And what he was saying, and as an administrator, I get what he's saying. He's like, in the book, you have a lot of very specific classrooms that have implemented this and are case studies of it, working really well, helping the teacher out, helping the students out. He is wondering if you have observed or heard about a school that has implemented this school-wide, and if you have, or if you have any insight, how an administrator could get this to be not just Mr. Drover's class because he's really good with tech, or the other social studies teacher who is really open to trying new things. As an administrator, how could he embed this into the school culture so that it is absolutely just the norm of every teacher?
I wish I could direct you and your administrator to whole schools, or even better, whole districts that had gone down this road with great success. And I'm not able to do that. I'm going to be honest with you that all of the case studies we have, all of the teachers who are featured, and as you know, they span the grades, they were amazing islands of incredible success in and of themselves. And I have seen schools set up with these kinds of mandates in Halton County, where I did much of my teaching. There was a new high school set up embracing technology, triangulated data as part of their mission, if you like. And teachers were actually hired to this new school on the basis of that. So Jamie Miller, who is the high school math teacher featured in there, was at a different school, and then he was hired into this new school because it. So I should, and I don't have an update. It would be very interesting to see to what extent that school has been successful. In fact, given the way they recruited the staff for that school, that these were the kinds of teachers that we met with who were doing this sort of thing. But what we're talking about here, I mean, our discussion has been about two things. It's been about triangulation. It's been about the use of technology to support triangulation of assessment. The issue your administrator is asking, of course, is about how do we bring about significant change and scaling it up. And that is a vital area. I've been charged with those kinds of responsibilities. I was assessment coordinator in Halton for many years, and that was our challenge. I would have to say that large-scale change is hugely vulnerable to changes in administration, either at the school level or the district level. And one of the problems that's plagued educational reform and change and improvement over the years, as Douglas Reeves from the US has talked about, is we never stay the course long enough to actually see long-term benefit.
Yeah, it's
We
like
are a
marathon
profession
training.
that engages in fads.
Yeah.
And, we latch onto this initiative and that initiative. And I shouldn't be so dismissive and say fads. A lot of these, of course, are political agendas. Of late, it's been very much the DEI initiative. When I moved into consultancy, assessment was the hot topic. My timing was great because everyone wanted to talk about assessment. We made great gains, but many of the districts that I worked in, where I worked in all the schools across a district and they were doing great things, the agenda's changed. Assessment's fallen off the radar. So that's a rather gloomy note on which to be bringing our conversation to an end. So I hope that your
Well, I
final
got one more
question is a more
question for
positive
you
one.
that
Yeah.
can make it light. But like to that point is, I think about it logistically and a little more cynical, just as you were saying. But when you get like the educational experts at a division level that are maybe starting a career or trying to level up their career, right? No one really wants to just reiterate, oh, let's just keep doing this. Everyone wants their new novel idea to come out, and then they try to sell that to the division, and it gets executed. So I can see why we don't stick to one thing
Yeah.
for very long, is because it's not as sexy to like just
Yeah,
stay
I
the
agree.
course with one stuff, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. Pretty much what I'm gonna tell them is like stay the course, keep the boat going. Like try to stick to this. Like maybe instead of having one PD day with this, like this is the year. Like we're going to try this. Like we got to do this, and yeah. So I'll try to give them that advice, and
I think, and that is a positive message, Conrad,
yeah,
insofar as, while, as you can imagine, as a consultant, I kind of had to go where the work was. And the most depressing thing for me was to do one-shot keynotes or one-shot PD days. And I knowing that has no impact other than perhaps someone can check a box and say, oh yeah, we had Cooper come in,
right.
My most satisfying work as a consultant has been long-term. And so absolutely, don't throw this and a whole bunch of other initiatives at your teachers. If this is resonating for you in your school, if other teachers in your school say yes, if your administrator is curious about doing this, then let's talk about, as the management team, as well as teacher, maybe informal leaders on this team, how do we make this actually fly? How can we sustain this initiative? And you need to be doing it for at least 4 years to actually see
4 years.
trends in achievement as opposed to blips.
Yeah.
You have to.
All right. Awesome. No, I 100% agree with that. Okay, I am very conscious of your time, but do you have time for one more question?
Of course.
Okay, so the takeaway is someone's going to listen to this and they're going to be very fascinated by our conversation, particularly what you're saying. And what I want them to do is something that they could do tomorrow. So think about this. And I'm going to use one of my classrooms from a previous year when I was a little less experienced, and I was basically to print out the PowerPoint slides, show the notes, tell the kids to take the notes, right? Typical this survival instinct of a first-year teacher sometimes. Let's say someone's having difficulty managing their class. They haven't done that classroom culture construction very well at the start, either that they're just jumping in or like maybe they didn't know about it, right? They're all learning. And they're struggling to really teach their class. If you were to have a conversation of like where to start with this, like the next day they come into the class and they really want to start implementing this and they want to start doing it from scratch. Like think about the most typical lecture-based fill-in-the-blank notes class. Where can they start just to get a foot in the door to this sort of practice?
I would say read the introduction and see if that message resonates for them, because the introduction is about this is not rocket science. And that actually what we're talking about in terms of triangulation is relatively simple. Leave the technology aside if that's not an area that's comfortable for you right now. Let's focus on greater student engagement by using a balanced, triangulated approach to assessment. And let's talk about this business of how do I need to structure my classroom differently? How do I need to talk to my students that would allow for me to have one-on-one conversations or spend time with individuals? And the best thing that they can do there is take a look at the Jackie Clark case study in this book. Now, I know that Jackie Clark is teaching grade 3, but she walks on water as far as I'm concerned. She's taught from junior kindergarten through to the intermediate grades, and she applies basically the same principles in terms of how you create a culture of learning in your classroom that is going to support observation and conversation, that is going to put a huge onus on the students to be self-monitoring, to be responsible for their own learning. And so Jackie, even if you just look at my interview with Jackie where she talks about locus of control, and her energy, apart from anything else, is so infectious. I would say that and the chapter that's in, I'm sorry, I think it's chapter 4. So read the introduction, read chapter 4, and look at Jackie's video clips by scanning those QR codes and see what you think.
All right, awesome. This is the most professional development episode I've ever had. So
You're too kind. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Damian, for coming on again. And I can't wait, to edit this and, polish it up and really share it with every educator I know. And I think, again, your book is Rebooting Assessment. It's probably mirrored here, but it's pretty cool. And again, as a guy, skeptic of professional development, and has had his fair share throughout his career of his eye roll, like, oh my God, it's another PD day. This literally was the turning point for me. And this made me engaged enough where I had to email the author and be like, let's talk. So there is something to this. And is there anything else you want to say to the people that are listening, either to talk about where they could order the book or find your other work, or any other message you want to say before we
Well, I want to say thank you to you Conrad, because your comments are why I've continued to do what I love to do and why I'm finding it rather difficult to slide into retirement. So thank you. You make
No
it all
problem.
worthwhile. The book Rebooting Assessment is published by Solution Tree in the United States, but the quickest way to get a copy is through Amazon. And yeah, thanks for listening, and follow Conrad, because I really have enjoyed meeting you. I've enjoyed our chats, and I tip my hat to the work that you were doing, not just for your students in your classroom, but for your colleagues across the nation and maybe beyond. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Professional Development with me, Mr. Drover. I hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your fellow educators. You can also connect with me on Instagram or via email to continue the conversation and share your thoughts. Well, until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep making a difference, both inside and outside the classroom. I'll see you in the next episode.